I don't think I love you no more. You never seem to call me lately, but I don't think she knew me at all.
Alright everybody, we'll do another video today. I wanted to do this video for a while now. It's going to be on AEDPA, the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996. It was signed by President Bill Clinton. It was passed by the 110th Congress, and it effectively strips our rights away as Americans. We need to bring awareness to this law. We need to get this law talked about. We need to get our politicians, we need to elect politicians that will repeal this law, because it is absolutely destructive to our rights as American citizens. It was briefly mentioned in Making a Murderer, so anybody that's watched Making a Murderer, you are aware of it. But I wanted to download the whole law and read it on the channel, but it's 170 pages long, so that's not an option. So I basically Googled and found an article that summarizes it, and the article is from the New Yorker website. It is written by Lincoln Kaplan, June 21st, 2015. And the title of it is The Destruction of Defendants' Rights. Now, what I'm going to do is read this first paragraph, and then we'll talk about it. And I might read a little bit more of it. We'll skim through it and see what it has to say. So pay attention, and then we'll discuss it. So, unfortunately, I cannot see this writing, so I'm going to have to use some reading glasses. It is what it is. So, alright. The Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, also known as AEDPA, is surely one of the worst statutes ever passed by Congress and signed into law by a president. The heart of the law is a provision stating that even when a state court misapplies the Constitution, a defendant cannot necessarily have his day in a federal court. Instead, he must prove that the state court's decision was contrary to what the Supreme Court has determined clearly established federal law, or that the decision was an unreasonable application of the law. The law gutted the federal writ of habeas corpus, which a federal court can use to order the release of a wrongly imprisoned person. It is often called the Great Writ because of its extraordinary power to protect the liberty of individuals. In the 1960s, the Supreme Court expanded the law of habeas corpus as a protection against the unfair treatment of defendants at every stage of criminal process, from arrest, interrogation, through trial, and sentencing, especially in cases leading to death sentences. This expansion was controversial, and under Chief Justice William H. Rehnquist, I can't even pronounce it, the court later restricted the availability of the writ. But the protection that the writ gave, even when it was limited, was indispensable. A dramatically high percentage of individuals sentenced to death had their sentences reversed owing to errors by the trial courts. So, what this law does, essentially, is before a federal court or federal judge could grant relief to wrongfully imprisoned people, coerced confessions, exculpatory evidence, things of that nature. But because of this law, now the defendant has to prove that the state court applied the law in an unreasonable manner, or hold on one second. Unreasonable application of the law, or contrary to what the Supreme Court has determined to be clearly established federal law. So, In Brendan Dassey's case, Laura Nyrider talked about this briefly in Making a Murderer. And when the federal court threw out his confession, he could not grant relief, so to speak, but the state had options. They could either appeal it to a higher court, they could release him, or they could retry him. If they retried him, they had to do it within 90 days. But if they retried him because of the federal court's decision, then they wouldn't be able to use his confession against him because the federal judge threw out the confession. Therefore, they would have had nothing on Brendan Dassey. Because as we know, Brendan Dassey has no physical evidence tying him to the murder of Teresa Halbach. He only has his coerced, misguided confession that it was so clearly, in a sense, coached. And, you know, you get the sense from watching that interview that the only way he was coming out of that room in his mind was if he told them what they wanted to hear, but he couldn't tell them what they wanted to hear because he didn't know. So he had to pick up pieces from what they were saying in the interrogation and put one and two together in his mind, or keep guessing until they finally got a story that they liked. So the reason why I wanted to make a video about this is nothing is ever going to change with AEDPA. Now, if we don't, as Americans, do something about it, demand that something be done about it, this is not a partisan issue. Every American should go out of their way to understand this law, understand how it affects them, and we should demand that it be repealed. Now, I'm not saying that Bill Clinton or the 110th Congress fully intended to do what this law has done, but it is clearly a failure of the justice system. Okay? And this has to be a major step in correcting things. Now, is there something in those 170 pages that I haven't read that I'm sure is useful? Do I think actual terrorists, should be able to go up and down the courts, get denied, and keep appealing and keep appealing and appealing and appealing and never actually get justice, never actually get the death penalty, whether or not you agree with the death penalty or not? No, I'm not saying that I think that's right. But we can't strip away the rights of Americans just because we want to hurry up and sentence or execute terrorists. And I think that's really just a cover for this. You know, it's really, in a sense, this law is just, they name it the Anti-Terrorism Effective Death Penalty Act, but it's really a way to take some of our freedoms away. Take the federal courts out of it, leave it up to the states. And we can't have that. We have to have oversight. The federal courts have to be able to grant relief if they see egregious violations of people's rights. So what I'm asking is for somebody, and I'm not saying I want to be the person to lead the charge on this, but what I'm asking is, there's a lot of brilliant people out there that I'm sure would agree with this, and somebody needs to start the campaign right now of getting this repealed. If nobody says anything about it and we all just sit here and accept it, then it's never going to change. This law needs to be repealed and not replaced. It just needs to be repealed and go back to how it was if the federal court finds errors and flaws in a case or a confession, they need to be able to grant relief right then. They should have the final say. So, if anybody has any ideas how we can get this started, because it's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to try to do something, but we desperately need to do something about this law. It can be done. Some people think about change and how unlikely it will be to get something like that accomplished. It can be done if enough people learn about what's going on and are able to speak up about it and get their local and state officials under the understanding that, look, if you're not for repealing this, you're not getting elected. I mean, that's just going to be facts. Contacting senators, filing petitions on change.org, whatever. Something needs to be done, and I'm going to need people's help to do it. It's just like the Patriot Act. Whether or not you think it's a good idea or not, and I know that there are good things in it, and I'm pretty sure that the Patriot Act has thwarted many terrorist attacks already. But it's similar to that in the sense that we have to give up our rights for protection. We have to give up some of our freedoms. The government being able to listen into your cell phone calls and basically search you inside and out at airports and this and that, all these different things. We're having to give up freedoms. But we should not have to give up our rights when it comes to a fair trial, and give up our rights as far as federal courts being able to oversee and overturn decisions of state courts. So, the only way this is going to happen is if you watching right now takes a moment to share this video everywhere that you can. It's not about me. You can just not share it, make your own video about it and share it. I don't care. That's really not the point. I've spoke about this many a times on my channel, other people's channel. This law needs to be repealed. I don't see why any lobbyist would be trying to sway our congressmen and women to vote against this. This is really, to me, a nonpartisan issue. So I don't really see the problem and why we can't get this done. But the only way it's going to get done, the only way we can start a movement is if we start talking about it. If you have a channel, you need to be talking about it on your channel. Share this video. If you like what you heard today and you're interested in the Stephen Avery, Brendan Dassey cases, subscribe to my channel. And until next time, y'all have a good one. And let me know what you think in the comment section.